We are now joined by Brianna Lyman of The Federalist. She has done a ton working and writing about the SAVE Act, and we'll start there. But I also want to get into, remind me to ask Brianna about the study out there that says if you vote Republican, you actually save lives, which is a pretty good thing based on.
We knew that before the study, but we'll take data too, so why not?
And we'll get to Brianna on that. She's also doing a great series on America 250. But let's start with this. We've got a super close race. I believe it's in the North Carolina Senate. The last I saw, Brianna, was it came down to 2 votes. This is the state Senate. And the SAVE Act. Now we've got Ken Paxton down in Texas saying, hey, if you'll pass the SAVE Act, I'll consider dropping out of this race because he wants for John Cornyn to support it. There's around 80% of voters who support this. I know many people out there are frustrated. What's the latest on it? And how in the world can we not get basic voter integrity, vote with a license, vote with the photo ID passed?
Yeah, and I'm happy you brought up that North Carolina race because it is still down to 2 votes. And when you have elections that are literally decided by 2 votes, it doesn't make election security less important. It makes it more important. It makes things like the SAVE Act more important. Because remember, the SAVE Act would require documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote and then voter ID. Right now, the only thing standing between a non-citizen and our free and fair elections is a little square box in the federal registration form that says you attest under penalty of perjury that you're a citizen, aka the honor system. And that is absolutely not enough. And so when you look at races like this one in North Carolina, when you look at Marionette Miller Meeks in 2020, she won her congressional race by 6 votes. Imagine if 6 non-citizens had cast a ballot in that race. That could have quite literally changed a congressional seat, changed the balance of Congress. That is unacceptable. And right now you have leaders in the Senate like Leader Thune, who is dragging his feet on legislation, like you said, that is popular nationwide amongst Republicans, Democrats, Blacks, Latinos, whites, you name it. Everyone's saying this is common sense legislation, and yet it's not being done.
What entirely is in the SAVE Act? I mean, you mentioned it's clearly about election integrity, but what are all the different pieces that it contains? Are there any things that aren't getting attention that would be really important for election integrity? It's just people are talking about the SAVE Act. I think it's important that everyone also know what's in it.
Yeah, and what the SAVE Act does, so there's the 1993 NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act. And what that does right now is it actually hamstrings the government from requiring proof of citizenship to vote because I think it was 2013, the Supreme Court, I think wrongly, interpreted that 1993 law to prohibit states from requiring documentary proof of citizenship to vote. So if you think of Arizona, Arizona has 2 registration forms. You can prove that you are a citizen and vote in state and federal elections, but if you can't prove that you're a citizen, you can only vote in federal elections. And so what the SAVE Act would do is it amends that law. It fixes the problem we've had for 30 years and says, no, you have to require documentary proof of citizenship, right? States should not be sued by the Obama and Biden DOJs for trying to make their elections more secure. President Trump seemed to hint in a Truth Social post that he wanted to add no trans and kids maybe into the whole SAVE Act negotiations. I think that was a bit unclear, but right now the 2 biggest things, proof of citizenship to register and voter ID. And a lot of people will say, well, we already have safeguards. And they cite things like HAVA and HAV, which are early 2000s legislation. Do you know in a state like California, let's say you don't have your driver's license or your social security, right? And you have no identification, you can still register to vote. And you know how you get to prove your identity? Your gym membership. What protocols do you go to get a gym membership? Nothing. You just take a picture in front of the little thing and they say, okay, here's your name. You can come to the gym. And you can use that to verify your identity to vote. So our elections are so insecure. And when you have 20 million people in this country illegally, we can't take chances.
Brianna, one of the things that I would just point out is the contrary argument does not exist, right? Because the argument is, well, it's racist to require voter ID. That's insane. As you said, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, people of all different backgrounds agree that you should have to have voter ID, photo ID to vote. So really, isn't this just an implicit acknowledgement from Democrats that they're cheating and worried that they might get caught? Because otherwise, none of the other arguments stand up.
Yeah, there is no legitimate reason. And if you talk about, let's go over first of all the racism thing, right? Remember Jim Crow 2.0 in Georgia? What was that,
Oh, yeah.
2021? They told us that Black people would never be able to vote again. CNN and the Washington Post actually did articles after the first big election, after the legislation went through, and they interviewed Black voters who said it was actually easier to vote now than it had been in the past. They weren't encumbered, they weren't prohibited from voting. So that never actually manifested, right? It was just that rah rah. Then you have claims that this will disenfranchise voters. And again, I bring it back to these smaller races that are decided by razor thin margins. Take this. In December, a woman from the Bahamas who is not a citizen admitted to the Georgia State Election Board she has voted in multiple elections, not because she was trying to do something illegal, but she said, look, they kept sending me papers. I thought I was eligible, so I did it, right? It wasn't nefarious, but there was no security and safeguards to stop her. Imagine she had cast a vote in this North Carolina race and one other non-citizen did that, right? That would change the outcome of an election. That actually disenfranchises American citizens. So Republicans and Democrats who say, well, this might disenfranchise people. Think about the Americans being disenfranchised by non-citizens voting.
Speaking to Brianna Lyman of the Federalist, and Brianna, the folks who write into us are saying we got to pass the SAVE Act. It's critical to pass the SAVE Act, and we have a problem here, of course, which is one, Majority Leader Thune does not seem willing to push for this. But even beyond that, without a 60-vote threshold, there's the threat of filibuster, not an actual talking filibuster that is assumed to be enough to shut this down. So that means that it doesn't get passed, right? So what is the best thing? Let's say we could get Majority Leader Thune to sit down right now with all of us. What should he do in this situation, given how important election integrity is and how much sense and how much support from the general public this SAVE Act has?
Yeah, and Chip Roy actually wrote a letter explaining the talking filibuster, which is that, Leader Thune has to basically call and have Democrats, they have to follow the rules and they have to talk. They get 2 times to talk each. Once they stop talking, they don't get to resume, right? And if Republicans were to enforce already standing procedures, Democrats would eventually just run out of time. And then you can hold a regular vote in which you would only need 51 votes to pass this legislation, which we know we have because Fetterman is on our side. And if a Republican is going to resign themselves to say, well, we don't want to get rid of the filibuster, but we want this legislation passed, then they're admitting they're never getting it passed. Republicans are never in our lifetime likely going to get a filibuster-proof majority. That is silly thinking. So what Republicans like Thune are saying is, well, I guess we're just going to have to settle for only doing things that Democrats want. But just remember something. Chuck Schumer has made it very clear when Democrats take back power, nothing, including nuking the filibuster, is off the table. When Democrats take back Congress, whether it's in 2026, 28, whenever, they will do what's necessary to push their agenda. And I wish Republicans would have the appetite to do the same on legislation that is universally popular. This is not a 50-50 issue. It is an 80-20 issue.
We're talking to Brianna Lyman of the Federalist. All right, everybody out there who's fired up about the SAVE Act, we are fired up. We want it to happen. But let me ask you about this, which is actually a very positive story I was reading about this week. There is now data out, and I believe you wrote about this or have talked about this as well, saying that if you vote Republican, particularly when it comes to DAs and the prosecution of violent crimes, the data reflects lives are saved because there's far less violent crime. Seems like kind of an important story that should get more attention. What did the data show? What does it tell us, and why is it significant?
Yeah. This was data that was kind of, I feel like, hidden. And granted, the Iran war started, so it didn't get buried. But what it shows is that despite people telling us that if you vote for a progressive prosecutor, you're being compassionate and empathetic, that compassion comes at a very deadly cost. And what this study by a Vanderbilt professor and a Wellesley College professor found is that when you narrowly elect a Republican prosecutor over a left-wing counterpart, you see a reduction in deaths among young men. 6.6%. That is not a drop in the bucket. That is a substantial decrease. And obviously, you don't need to study, to show this. But Republican prosecutors, they actually want to hold criminals accountable. They send them to jail. And most importantly, they levy consequences on these criminals that do come with the consequence of restricting their access to firearms. It reduces suicide among young men. It also reduces other forms of gun violence. And so you think to yourself, Democrats hate gun violence. Everybody hates gun violence, but Democrats also hate the Second Amendment. Instead of taking away the Second Amendment from law-abiding citizens, if you want to reduce gun violence, elect a Republican prosecutor. Tell your progressive prosecutors what they're doing is not only not working, but it's deadly and dangerous for people that Democrats claim they want to help. They want to help victims of gun violence. This is how you do it. Be a tough on crime prosecutor.
Brianna Lyman, great to have you with us from the Federalist. Come back soon.
Thanks for having me.